The first time Claire Whitman heard a lawyer say she had never existed, she was sitting 12 feet away from the man who had once promised to build a life with her. The courtroom was cold in the way only county courthouses can be cold, not from the air conditioning alone, but from the polished benches, the high ceiling, the old brass clock above the clerk's desk, and the quiet understanding that people came here when private pain had become too large to keep inside a home. Claire sat in the second row with both hands folded over her mother's leather handbag, the same brown bag her mother had carried to church, grocery stores, school meetings, and finally to the bank the day she helped Claire sign the first loan that kept Grant Whitman's little development company from closing before it ever had a sign on the door. Across the aisle, Grant stood beside his attorney in a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, his silver cuff links catching the courtroom lights whenever he moved his hand. He did not look at Claire. That was what hurt in a strange, hollow way. Not his confidence. Not the woman beside him, Vanessa Cole, with her cream blazer, smooth blonde hair, and careful smile. It was the refusal to look, as if not seeing Claire made the lie easier to carry. Grant's lawyer rose with a folder in his hand and addressed Judge Margaret Hale in the smooth voice of a man who had practiced sounding reasonable while saying something cruel. Your Honor, before we proceed, we object to Ms. Whitman's standing in this matter. Her name does not appear in the official corporate records, property filings, shareholder reports, or founding documents currently on file with the state. Legally speaking, there is no record of Claire Whitman having any role in Whitman Development Group. A faint rustle moved through the gallery. Someone behind Claire whispered, then stopped. Vanessa lowered her eyes for half a second, but not before Claire saw the smile. Small, polite, victorious. Claire did not move. She had learned, over the last 2 years, that silence could either be surrender or strategy, and the difference depended on what you were holding back. Inside the handbag beneath her fingers was a worn notebook, a faded bank receipt, and a folded photograph of a storefront office on Maple Avenue. 800 square feet, stained carpet, bad plumbing, and a paper sign in the window that read Whitman Development Group in letters Claire had printed herself at midnight because Grant said they could not afford a designer. Back then, he had called her his anchor, his miracle, the woman who believed before anyone else did. Later, when money came in and investors began saying his name with respect, he found new words for her. Emotional, ordinary, too sentimental for business. By the time Vanessa entered his life as a consultant with perfect timing and sharper ambition, Claire had already begun disappearing from conversations long before she disappeared from paper. But hearing it said aloud in court was different. Hearing a stranger claim she had never been there felt like watching someone paint over every door she had opened with her own hands. Judge Hale looked down at the file, then over her reading glasses at Grant's table. Ms. Whitman, she said, her voice calm but not unkind, your counsel will have a chance to respond. Claire's attorney, Evelyn Brooks, did not stand immediately. She placed one steady hand on Claire's shoulder, not for drama, not for comfort exactly, but as a quiet reminder to breathe. Grant finally glanced over. For one brief second, their eyes met, and Claire saw the man he used to be buried under the man he had chosen to become. He expected tears. He expected anger. He expected the fragile woman he had trained the world to remember. Claire gave him none of it. She only opened her handbag, touched the edge of the old receipt, and waited for the truth to be called by its proper name. Evelyn Brooks rose only after the silence had become heavy enough for everyone in the room to feel it. She was not tall, and she did not have the theatrical presence Grant's attorney seemed to admire in himself, but there was something about her stillness that made people listen. She buttoned her navy jacket, lifted one thin folder from the table, and said, Your Honor, the opposing counsel is correct about one thing. The current electronic records do not show my client's name. That is precisely why we are here. Grant's attorney gave a faint smile, the kind men give when they think a woman has just admitted defeat in a language they understand. Grant leaned back half an inch, his shoulders relaxing. Vanessa crossed one leg over the other and looked toward Claire with the soft, polished pity of someone already picturing tomorrow's celebration dinner. But Claire knew Evelyn better than that. Evelyn never gave away a point unless she had already built a trap around it. 2 years earlier, Claire had first noticed something wrong when a letter from First Harbor Bank arrived at her apartment in a plain white envelope. She had expected another notice about the divorce settlement, Another sterile reminder that her old life now belonged to filing cabinets and strangers. Instead, the letter thanked her for confirming that she had no remaining financial interest in Whitman Development Group or its associated properties. Claire had read the sentence 4 times at her small kitchen table while rain tapped against the window above the sink. No remaining financial interest. The phrase was so clean it almost sounded harmless. That was how Grant had always preferred his cruelty, wrapped in formal language, stamped, dated, and mailed. She called the bank the next morning. The representative was polite, then cautious, then suddenly too professional. "Ma'am, according to our system, you signed a release of interest 14 months ago." Claire remembered gripping the phone so tightly her fingertips went pale. "I never signed that," she said. There was a pause, the sound of keys clicking, then the sentence that changed everything. "You may need to speak with an attorney." After that, the missing pieces began appearing everywhere, or rather, disappearing everywhere. The county property office had no record of her on the Maple Avenue building. The state business registry listed Grant as sole founder. The shareholder report referred to Vanessa as strategic operations advisor, but did not mention Claire, not once, not even in the earliest filings. At the registration counter downtown, a young clerk with tired eyes searched 3 databases and finally looked up with practiced indifference. "Ma'am, according to this system, you were never listed." Claire had walked out into the February wind feeling as if the city had tilted beneath her feet. She did not cry until she reached her car, and even then the tears were not loud. They were quiet, angry, almost embarrassed tears, the kind that come when a person realizes someone has not merely stolen from them, but has expected them to be too broken to object. That evening, she took the brown leather notebook from the back of her closet. Inside were old meeting notes, names of contractors, sketches of the Maple Avenue office, and a list in her own handwriting titled "Bills We Can Survive This Month." Tucked between the pages was the bank receipt from the first wire transfer, $28,000 from the small inheritance her mother had left her. The next morning, Claire went back to the registration office, not to argue, but to ask for the archive request form. The same clerk told her it could take weeks. Then an older woman behind the counter looked up from a stack of folders and stared at Claire's name on the form. "I remember you," she said softly. "You came in years ago with your husband. You brought coffee for everyone because the printer jammed." Claire could barely breathe. The woman leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Records disappear from screens all the time. They do not always disappear from storage." That was how Claire found Evelyn Brooks, and that was how Evelyn found the first thread Grant had failed to cut. Evelyn placed the folder on the council table as if it weighed no more than a grocery receipt, but the way Grant's eyes followed it told Claire he understood exactly what kind of danger could fit inside a few sheets of paper. Judge Hale turned slightly toward Evelyn. "Ms. Brooks, you may respond." Evelyn nodded once. "Thank you, Your Honor. We are not disputing that the current digital records exclude my client. We are disputing how those records came to exclude her." Grant's attorney rose halfway. "Your Honor, this is speculation. It is an accusation without foundation." Evelyn did not look at him. She opened the folder and removed a certified request form bearing the seal of the County Archive Division. "The foundation, Your Honor, is in the archive." A different kind of silence settled over the courtroom then, sharper than the first. It was not shock yet. It was anticipation, the held breath before a locked door opens. Claire kept her gaze on the polished edge of the judge's bench, but in the corner of her eye she saw Vanessa's posture change. The woman who had entered the courtroom like a guest at a private club now sat still, her hand resting too carefully on her knee. Grant leaned toward his attorney and whispered something. The attorney did not answer. Evelyn continued. "After my client was informed by 3 separate offices that her name did not exist in the company's active records, we petitioned for access to the off-site storage files connected to the original registration of Whitman Development Group. Those documents were not easy to obtain. They were boxed, misindexed, and stored in a county facility nearly 40 miles from this courthouse. But they were not destroyed." She handed the first document to the clerk. The clerk passed it to Judge Hale, who adjusted her glasses and read in silence. Claire could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above them, the distant cough of someone in the hallway, the soft scrape of paper under the judge's fingertips. Ordinary sounds. Small sounds. The kind of sounds life makes while a person waits to find out whether the truth has survived. Judge Hale looked up. Counsel, approach. Both attorneys stepped forward. Grant's attorney scanned the document, and for the first time that morning, his expression lost its practiced smoothness. Evelyn's voice remained even. The first document is the original formation filing dated May 17, 2012. It lists Grant Michael Whitman and Claire N. Whitman as co-founders. The second is the initial equity agreement, notarized the same day. The third is a commercial lease guarantee for the Maple Avenue office, signed by my client. The fourth is a bank transfer receipt showing $28,000 from Mrs. Whitman's personal inheritance deposited into the company's startup account. Grant stood so quickly his chair made a hard sound against the floor. That money was a gift, he said, too loudly, then seemed to remember where he was. Judge Hale looked at him with the patience of someone who had seen many powerful men confuse volume with proof. Mr. Whitman, you will sit unless addressed. Grant sat. His face had changed color, not dramatically, but enough. The confident warmth was gone, leaving something pale and tight around his mouth. Evelyn turned one page. We also have a document filed 14 months ago removing Mrs. Whitman from all associated holdings. My client denies signing it. The signature does not match her verified signatures on the original filings, the lease guarantee, or the bank documents. We have requested forensic review, but for today's hearing, our immediate request is simple. Restore her standing while the matter is investigated. Grant's attorney tried again. Your Honor, even if older documents exist, business records are updated all the time. Divorce changes ownership interests. Settlements change obligations. This is a normal corporate housekeeping issue being inflated into a personal grievance. Claire felt the words strike exactly where they were meant to. Personal grievance. As if her life's work were a mood. As if the sleepless nights, the calls to contractors, the months she paid the office electric bill on her credit card while Grant chased investors across golf courses and hotel lounges, could be reduced to a woman unable to move on. Evelyn finally turned toward him. Corporate housekeeping does not usually require a forged release, missing amendment history, and 3 government systems all reflecting the same convenient absence. Vanessa looked down. Grant stared straight ahead. Judge Hale read the final page again, then placed it carefully on the bench. When she spoke, her voice was calm, but every word carried. Based on the certified archive records presented, this court finds sufficient cause to recognize Claire N. Whitman as an original listed party in the formation and early ownership documents of Whitman Development Group, pending full review. The clerk will enter an order restoring her name to the case record and related filings under temporary protective status. For a moment, Claire did not understand that it was over, or at least that this part of it was. Then she heard it. Her full name, spoken by the court, entered back into the world where Grant had tried to remove it. Claire N. Whitman. Not Mrs. Grant Whitman. Not former spouse. Not disputed claimant. Her name, whole and legal and alive. The order did not make the room explode with drama. There were no gasps loud enough to echo, no sudden collapse of all the polished faces that had arrived expecting Claire to be dismissed like a clerical inconvenience. Real consequences rarely arrived that way. They came through the quiet scratch of a clerk's pen, through the measured tap of keys, through a judge's instruction repeated clearly enough that no one could pretend not to understand. The clerk read the order back into the record, and every word felt like a small stone being placed back into the foundation Grant had tried to remove. Claire N. Whitman, original listed party. Temporary protective standing. Related filings restored pending full review. Claire sat very still, but beneath the table her fingers had loosened around the strap of her mother's handbag. For the first time in months, she was not gripping the past to keep it from disappearing. Across the aisle, Grant's attorney requested a recess. Judge Hale granted 15 minutes, and the courtroom began to move again, people rising, papers sliding into folders, low voices gathering in the corners like weather. Grant turned away from his attorney and walked toward the back of the room, but he stopped near Claire's bench. Vanessa stayed behind him, her expression smooth in the way glass is smooth before it cracks. Grant looked down at Claire, and for one breath he seemed almost familiar, not kind, not sorry, but familiar enough to remind her of the man who once ate takeout on the floor of the Maple Avenue office because they could not afford furniture yet. "Claire," he said quietly, "this does not have to become ugly." The sentence was so perfectly Grant that something inside her almost laughed. He had erased her from records, reduced her to a rumor, allowed strangers to describe her as a bitter former spouse, and now ugliness had become a thing he wanted to avoid because it had finally become inconvenient for him. Evelyn appeared beside Claire before Claire had to answer. "Mr. Whitman, any communication with my client can go through counsel." Grant's jaw tightened. "I was speaking to my former wife." Evelyn's voice remained calm. "You were speaking to a party recognized by this court. There is a difference." Vanessa touched Grant's arm, a small warning disguised as affection. "We should not do this here," she murmured. Claire finally looked at her. Not with hatred. Hatred would have given Vanessa too much space in a life she no longer owned. Claire looked at her with the exhausted clarity of a woman who had spent too long being polite to people who mistook restraint for weakness. Vanessa looked away first. During the recess, Evelyn led Claire into the hallway, where the courthouse smelled faintly of floor polish, coffee, and damp wool coats. Sunlight fell through the tall windows in pale rectangles across the marble floor. People passed by carrying manila envelopes, diaper bags, briefcases, flowers, all the strange little objects humans bring when their lives are being sorted by law. Claire leaned against the wall and closed her eyes for 1 second. Not to cry. Not anymore. Just to feel the weight shifting. Evelyn stood beside her without speaking. That was one of the reasons Claire trusted her. Evelyn understood that not every silence needed to be filled with comfort. After a moment, Claire opened her handbag and took out the old photograph of the Maple Avenue office. The edges were soft from years of being handled. In the picture, Grant was standing beside the paper sign in the window, smiling like a man who believed the future belonged to him. Claire was beside him, half turned toward the camera, holding 2 cups of gas station coffee and laughing at something no one would ever remember. Behind them, the glass reflected the street, the parked cars, the gray strip mall across the road, ordinary America in all its unglamorous honesty. Evelyn glanced at the photograph. "Keep that," she said. "It matters." Claire nodded. It did matter, but not because it proved Grant had once loved her, or because it rescued some softer version of their history. It mattered because she had been there. Before the investors, before the office towers, before Vanessa's name appeared on glossy brochures, before Grant learned to call ambition a vision and betrayal a business decision, Claire had been there with coffee, bad carpet, unpaid bills, and $28,000 of her mother's money. When the courtroom doors opened again, Claire placed the photograph back into the handbag, straightened her navy dress, and followed Evelyn inside. This time, when she walked past Grant's table, he watched her. The difference was small, almost invisible, but Claire felt it. For years, he had treated her like a footnote. Now the court had forced him to read the line he had skipped. When the hearing resumed, the air in the courtroom had changed. It was still the same room with the same wooden benches and the same brass clock counting down ordinary minutes, but the balance had shifted in a way no one could fully disguise. Before the recess, Grant's table had looked like the center of gravity. After the order, it looked like a table where people were trying very hard not to panic. Evelyn returned to her place beside Claire and arranged her documents with almost tender precision. Grant's attorney spoke first, requesting that any restoration of Claire's name remain limited to the present case and not affect pending business transactions. He used phrases like market disruption, investor confidence, and unnecessary harm to third parties, each one polished smooth enough to hide the fact that a major sale was waiting behind the courthouse doors like a car with the engine running. Judge Hale listened without interruption, her expression giving nothing away. Then Evelyn stood. "Your Honor, there is a pending acquisition offer for Whitman Development Group scheduled to close within 10 business days. My client was not notified. My client was not asked to approve the transaction. My client was not disclosed to the buyer as an original equity holder. If the transaction proceeds before the record is corrected, the harm will not be theoretical. It will be permanent." Grant turned sharply toward his attorney, and that one movement told Claire more than any confession could have. He had known. Not just suspected. Not misunderstood. Known. Evelyn lifted another document. This is a copy of the purchase memorandum circulated to Northbridge Capital. It describes Mr. Whitman as sole founder and sole controlling owner. It also includes a statement that there are no unresolved ownership claims. Grant's attorney objected, but his voice had lost its easy rhythm. Judge Hale overruled him. Claire watched Grant's hand close around a pen until the white plastic bent slightly between his fingers. She remembered that hand signing birthday cards, closing car doors, resting lightly on her back at charity dinners where everyone told her how lucky she was to be married to a man with such vision. How strange, she thought. That vision had never helped him see the woman standing beside him until losing sight of her became profitable. Vanessa leaned toward him and whispered, but Grant did not answer her. For the first time, the alliance between them looked less like romance or strategy and more like two people sitting in the same storm without the same umbrella. Judge Hale reviewed the memorandum, then turned to Grant's table. Mr. Whitman, did you disclose Mrs. Whitman's archived ownership documents to Northbridge Capital? Grant's attorney answered before Grant could speak. Your Honor, my client relied on the active records available at the time. That was not my question, Judge Hale said. The courtroom became so quiet Claire could hear the flag near the bench whisper against its pole when the heating system stirred. Grant looked at the judge, then at the papers, then finally at Claire. There was no apology in his eyes. Not yet. Only calculation searching for a door. I believe the matter had been resolved in the divorce, he said. Evelyn did not move, but Claire felt the sentence pass through her like a cold thread. Resolved. That was the word he had chosen for erasure. Judge Hale made a note. This court is issuing a temporary injunction preventing any sale, transfer, dilution, restructuring, or disposal of assets connected to Whitman Development Group until the ownership record and disputed release documents have been fully reviewed. The clerk will notify the relevant state office and any identified acquiring party. Vanessa's composure slipped for only a second, but it was enough. Her lips parted. Grant stared at the bench as if the judge had removed the floor beneath him with a sentence. Claire felt Evelyn's hand brush the edge of her sleeve. A small signal to stay seated, stay calm. Let the order do what outrage never could. The acquisition was not just delayed. It was frozen. The story Grant had sold to investors, to Vanessa, to himself, had been stopped at the courthouse door by the one person he had tried to turn into a blank space. Claire looked down at her mother's handbag and thought of the $28,000 that had once felt like everything her mother had left behind. It had not disappeared. It had waited, patient as truth, until someone finally asked where it went. By the time the hearing ended for the day, the courthouse hallway had filled with the quiet aftermath of interrupted plans. Grant's attorney was already on his phone, speaking in a low, urgent voice near the elevators. Vanessa stood several feet away from him, no longer touching Grant's arm, her cream blazer bright under the courthouse lights, and her expression carefully blank. Grant remained outside the courtroom doors with one hand in his pocket, staring at nothing in particular, as if the marble floor might rearrange itself into an answer. Claire walked past him with Evelyn at her side, and for once, Grant was the one who seemed uncertain about whether he had the right to speak. Claire, he said, softer this time. Evelyn stopped, but Claire lifted one hand just enough to let her know she could answer for herself. She turned toward Grant. In the harsh hallway light, he looked older than he had that morning. Not ruined. Not defeated completely. Just exposed. There was a difference, and Claire understood it because she had lived for years under exposure disguised as marriage. What do you want, Grant? She asked. He glanced toward Vanessa, then back to Claire. Northbridge is going to walk away if this gets messy. There it was again, that word. Messy. The word people used when the truth started leaving fingerprints. Claire studied him for a moment, remembering how he used to stand in front of investors with his hands open, warm and persuasive, telling them Whitman Development Group had been born from grit, discipline, and vision. He never mentioned the nights Claire had eaten cereal for dinner so they could pay the contractor on time. He never mentioned the handwritten checks, the home equity questions, the way she had smiled through family dinners while his father called the company Grant's Gamble and his mother asked Claire when she planned to get a real job. He only remembered her when memory could be useful. This is not messy because I came back, she said. This is messy because you took my name off what I helped build. Grant's mouth tightened. You were compensated in the divorce. Claire almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was astonishing how small a man could make himself while standing in an expensive suit. I was silenced in the divorce, she said. There is a difference. Vanessa stepped forward then, her heels clicking once against the marble. Claire, I know this is emotional for you, but there are employees involved. Families. Investors. People who had nothing to do with your marriage. Claire looked at her, and the hallway seemed to narrow around that sentence. It was a clever move, almost elegant in its cruelty, to wrap theft in concern for other people. Claire had seen Grant do it before. Vanessa had learned well. You are right, Claire said. There are employees involved. That is why the court should know who owns what before anyone sells anything. Vanessa's face remained composed, but color rose faintly in her cheeks. Evelyn shifted beside Claire, watching everything, saying nothing. Grant lowered his voice. What do you want from me? The question landed with a strange sadness. Years ago, Claire would have wanted him to understand. She would have wanted an apology, a confession, some sign that the man she had loved had not been entirely swallowed by ambition. Now, standing in that hallway with her mother's handbag on, her arm and the court order folded safely inside Evelyn's folder, she realized she did not need his understanding to stand upright. I want the corrected records, she said. I want the forged release investigated. I want Northbridge told the truth. And I want every document that names me restored before you move $1, 1 share, or 1 square foot of property. Grant looked at her as if she had spoken in a language he had once known but forgotten. You would risk the company just to prove a point? Claire's voice did not rise. That was the part that made him blink. No, Grant. I risked everything years ago to help build the company. Today, I am protecting it from the man who thought ownership meant being able to erase people. For a moment, no one spoke. A clerk pushed a cart of files past them, the wheels squeaking softly over the tile. Somewhere downstairs, a security scanner beeped, and an elevator opened with a tired chime. Ordinary sounds again, surrounding an extraordinary end to a lie. Grant looked away first. Vanessa followed him toward the elevators, but she did not take his hand. Claire watched them go, feeling no triumph sharp enough to cut her, no desire to chase them with words. The victory was quieter than that. It sat in her chest like a steady light. Evelyn touched the folder under her arm. We have work ahead, she said. Claire nodded. For the first time in a long time, work did not frighten her. Work was something she knew how to do. Work was how she had survived him. Work was how she would reclaim every line he had tried to remove. The next morning, Claire woke before sunrise in her apartment above the old pharmacy on Hartwell Street, the kind of place where the radiators clicked like impatient fingers and the floors remembered every footstep from the last 70 years. For a moment, before her eyes fully opened, she forgot the courthouse, the injunction, the judge's voice placing her name back where it belonged. Then her phone lit up on the nightstand. 3 missed calls from unknown numbers. 1 email from Evelyn. 1 text from her younger brother, Daniel, who had never trusted Grant and had taken quiet satisfaction in being proven right by the universe, as younger brothers often do. Claire ignored the calls and opened Evelyn's email while coffee brewed in the tiny kitchen. Northbridge Capital had formally acknowledged receipt of the court order at 6:43 that morning. Their acquisition team had requested clarification on Claire's ownership status, the disputed release, and any possible misrepresentation in the sale documents. Beneath Evelyn's careful legal language, Claire could read the truth clearly enough. Grant's polished deal was no longer polished. It had fingerprints on it. By 9 o'clock, Claire was sitting in Evelyn's office, a converted brick building 2 blocks from the courthouse with framed trial certificates on the walls and a ficus tree that looked as though it survived purely out of professional obligation. Evelyn placed a stack of newly printed documents between them. Now that your standing has been restored, we can request discovery. Bank records, internal emails, amendment histories, communications with Northbridge, and the original release document. Claire touched the top page. The paper was warm from the printer. It felt strangely alive. How long will it take? She asked. Evelyn removed her glasses and set them on the desk. Longer than you want. Less time than Grant hopes. That answer should have frightened Claire, but it steadied her instead. For years, Grant had made time his weapon. He waited until she was tired to demand agreement. Waited until she was ashamed to rewrite the story. Waited until she wanted peace badly enough to accept less than truth. Now time belonged to procedure, and procedure, slow as it was, did not flatter him. Evelyn turned another page. There is one more issue. Grant's team filed a sworn statement during the sale process confirming that no undisclosed party had any claim to the company. If Northbridge relied on that statement, they will want answers. Claire looked toward the window. Outside, commuters hurried past with paper cups and laptop bags, each carrying some private worry into the business day. She wondered how many people had walked by the Maple Avenue office years ago and seen nothing more than a struggling little storefront with peeling paint and a crooked sign. They would never have guessed that a woman inside was teaching herself zoning language at midnight, calling plumbers at dawn, and learning how to sound calm while asking the bank for one more week. Does this mean Northbridge could sue him? Claire asked. Evelyn's expression did not change. It means Northbridge will protect itself. People with that much money rarely confuse friendship with liability. Claire almost laughed. That sounded like the kindest possible description of American business, which was not saying much. Before she could respond, Evelyn's assistant knocked and opened the door slightly. Ms. Brooks, there is a woman here asking for Ms. Whitman. She says her name is Linda Parrish. Claire froze. Linda Parrish had been Whitman Development Group's first bookkeeper, a widow in her late 50s who wore reading glasses on a chain and kept peppermint candies in her desk drawer. Grant had let her go after the divorce, claiming the company needed a more modern accounting department. Claire had not seen her in almost 3 years. Evelyn looked at Claire. Do you know her? Claire nodded slowly. She was there at the beginning. Linda entered carrying a canvas tote bag against her hip, her gray hair pulled into a neat bun, her face lined with nerves and resolve. She looked at Claire first, and something in her expression softened. I saw the notice online this morning, she said. The court order. Then she placed the tote bag on Evelyn's desk. I kept copies. Grant told me to shred them after the system migration, but something about it felt wrong. Claire stared at the bag. The room seemed to shrink around it. Linda opened it and removed a folder thick with old payroll summaries, transfer logs, scanned signatures, and email printouts. Her hands trembled only once. I should have come sooner, she said. Claire stood, but her voice came out quiet. You came now. Linda looked down at the documents, then back at Claire. He did not just remove your name from the records, honey. He built a new set of records around the space where your name used to be. Evelyn reached for the first folder, and Claire felt the steady light inside her chest grow. Brighter, not because the road ahead had become easy, but because the lie had finally started attracting witnesses. By noon, Linda Parrish's folders had turned Evelyn's conference table into a map of everything Grant had hoped would stay buried. There were payroll summaries from the first year, when Claire had gone unpaid for 6 months because every spare dollar went toward permits, inspections, and one stubborn HVAC unit that failed every time the temperature dropped below 40 degrees. There were email chains where contractors addressed questions to Claire because she was the one who answered before dawn and after dinner. There were scanned copies of checks from Claire's personal account, marked for office rent, legal filing fees, and the first insurance premium Whitman Development Group ever carried. But the document that made Evelyn go still was not dramatic in appearance. It was a plain internal memo dated 3 months after the divorce became final, printed on company letterhead, with Grant's initials at the bottom and a note from Vanessa in the margin. Consolidate founder narrative before Northbridge review. Evelyn read it twice, then looked at Linda. Do you know who wrote the margin note? Linda nodded. Vanessa did. She was handling presentation materials for investors by then. Claire sat back slowly. Founder narrative. 2 ordinary words, clean enough for a conference room, cold enough to erase a person. It was not enough that Grant had taken control of the company. He had needed the story too. He needed every investor, employee, banker, and future buyer to believe he had built the company alone, because a man like Grant could share a building, a bank account, even a bed once, but he could not share applause. Linda removed one more envelope from the tote bag. This was from the system migration. I printed it because the changes looked strange. Evelyn opened it and spread 3 pages across the table. They showed user activity logs, amendment timestamps, and administrator approvals. Claire did not understand every technical line, but she understood enough. Her name had not vanished all at once. It had been removed in pieces. First from the shareholder contact list, then from the founder biography, then from the property guarantee notes, then from the archived equity summary. Like someone taking a photograph apart with scissors, careful not to leave the whole image behind. Evelyn tapped one entry with her pen. This update was approved from Grant's executive account. This one from Vanessa's administrative profile. This one references a release document uploaded after the divorce. Linda swallowed. I never saw Claire sign anything like that. Evelyn's face remained composed, but her eyes sharpened. That is what we needed. Claire looked at the papers until the lines blurred slightly. Not from tears, exactly, though grief was somewhere in the room, sitting quietly in an old chair. It was the grief of recognizing how deliberate it had been. For years, she had wondered whether Grant had simply let her fade from his version of the past because remembering her made him uncomfortable. Now the answer lay in black ink on white paper. He had not forgotten her. Forgetting would have been almost merciful. He had remembered exactly where she stood and then spent months moving the world around her empty outline. Evelyn gathered the logs and placed them in a separate folder. We will file a supplemental motion this afternoon. We will also notify Northbridge that the court may need preservation of all acquisition communications. Linda looked nervous. Will I have to testify? Probably, Evelyn said. But not today. Claire turned to Linda. Thank you. Linda's eyes filled, but she blinked it away with the practical discipline of a woman who had balanced ledgers through recessions, layoffs, and men who thought bookkeeping was invisible until tax season. I should have done more back then, she said. Claire shook her head. You kept the truth alive. That is not nothing. The words seemed to settle Linda's shoulders. Outside the conference room, Evelyn's assistant answered phones that had not stopped ringing since morning. Northbridge wanted a call. Grant's attorney wanted a delay. A local business reporter had left a message. The lie was no longer contained inside Grant's office, where polished glass walls and expensive coffee could make anything seem legitimate. It was moving now, document by document, witness by witness, into daylight. Claire stood and walked to the window. Across the street, the courthouse steps were bright under the afternoon sun. Yesterday, she had climbed those steps afraid that the law might treat her like a stranger to her own life. Today, she watched people come and go through the heavy doors and understood something she wished she had known years earlier. Paper could be used to erase, but paper could also remember. By late afternoon, Evelyn had filed the supplemental motion, and by 6 o'clock the first call from Northbridge Capital came through on speakerphone in the conference room. Claire sat beside Linda with her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes earlier. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, one legal pad in front of her, one pen aligned perfectly beside it, as if order on a desk could hold back the chaos of rich men discovering a deal might not belong to the man selling it. The voice from Northbridge belonged to a woman named Patricia Lowell, senior counsel, precise, controlled, and unmistakably unhappy. We received the court order and your supplemental notice, Ms. Brooks. We are suspending all closing activity pending review. Evelyn thanked her with professional calm. Patricia continued. We will require copies of the archived formation documents, the disputed release, all materials supporting Ms. Whitman's claim, and any evidence showing knowledge of omission or misrepresentation by Mr. Whitman or his representatives. Claire looked at the folders spread across the table, the old payroll summaries, the transfer logs, the migration printouts, Linda's careful notes. For years, these papers had sat in boxes and tote bags, invisible to the world. Now a private equity firm with offices in New York, Dallas, and San Francisco wanted them before dinner. Human dignity, Claire thought, moved slowly. Liability moved at the speed of money. Patricia's voice sharpened slightly. To be clear, Northbridge was informed that Mr. Whitman held clean authority to sell. If that representation is inaccurate, our position changes substantially. Evelyn glanced at Claire, then answered. We understand. After the call ended, Linda exhaled like she had been holding her breath since lunch. They sounded mad, she said. Evelyn capped her pen. They are not mad. They are calculating. Claire took a small sip of cold coffee and almost smiled. That may be worse. It usually is, Evelyn said. The phone rang again before anyone could stand. This time it was Grant's attorney. Evelyn took the call privately in her office, but the glass door did very little to hide the tension in her posture. Claire watched her through the pain, the way Evelyn stood with one hand on her hip, listening more than speaking. After several minutes, Evelyn returned. They want a settlement conference tomorrow morning. Linda looked at Claire. That was fast. Claire knew what fast meant in Grant's language. Fast meant he wanted control before facts developed muscles. Fast meant he wanted her in a room where pressure could be dressed up as compromise. Fast meant he was afraid of what would happen if Northbridge kept asking questions. What are they offering? Claire asked. Evelyn's mouth tightened. Money. A confidentiality agreement. A corrected private record. No admission of wrongdoing. Linda made a sound under her breath. Not quite a laugh and not quite a curse. Just the exhausted noise of a woman who had seen enough office politics to know when someone was trying to buy a broom for a house already on fire. Claire looked down at the old photograph on the table. Maple Avenue. The bad carpet. The paper sign. The 2 cups of gas station coffee. There had been a time when she would have taken the money just to make the humiliation stop. There had been a time when silence looked like safety because speaking had cost her so much. Grant had counted on that woman. He had built an entire strategy around her fatigue. But the woman sitting in Evelyn's office was no longer trying to be chosen, believed, or forgiven by him. She was trying to become accurate. Not angry. Not vindictive. Accurate. Evelyn sat across from her. You do not have to decide tonight, she said. Claire appreciated that, but the answer had already formed inside her, quiet and clean. He can. Keep the confidentiality agreement, she said. I am not hiding my own name to protect his. Linda's eyes lowered, and Claire saw relief move across her face like sunlight passing over a window. Evelyn nodded once, as if she had expected nothing less but respected the choice enough not to rush it. We will attend the conference, she said. We will listen, and we will not agree to any correction that happens in private while the damage remains public. Claire stood and walked to the window. Across the street, the courthouse had grown golden in the evening light, its stone steps washed in the color of something almost gentle. For the first time, she understood that restoration was not a single order, a single document, or a single moment in front of a judge. It was a process of refusing to disappear in all the places where disappearance had once been demanded of her. Tomorrow, Grant would offer money for silence. But Claire had already learned the cost of silence, and it was far higher than anything he could wire into an account. The settlement conference took place the next morning in a narrow room on the 3rd floor of the courthouse, a room designed for compromise and furnished like an apology. There was a long laminate table, 12 mismatched chairs, a coffee station with powdered creamer, and one window overlooking the parking lot where lawyers in dark coats moved between cars with the grim purpose of people paid by the hour. Claire sat beside Evelyn with Linda Parrish behind them, her canvas tote bag now empty, but still folded carefully on her lap like a witness that had done its duty. Grant arrived 5 minutes late with his attorney and Vanessa, though Vanessa did not sit beside him this time. She chose the chair closest to the door. Claire noticed it without meaning to. Small distances often told the truth before people did. Grant's attorney opened with courtesy polished thin by desperation. We believe everyone in this room has an interest in resolving this matter quickly and privately. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was an offer generous enough to insult her properly. A lump sum payment, reimbursement of legal fees, a private amendment. Acknowledging Claire as a historical contributor, and a confidentiality agreement broad enough to turn her own memories into something she would need permission to mention. Evelyn read without changing expression. Claire read only the first page, then stopped. Historical contributor. Not co-founder. Not equity holder. Not original listed party. Historical contributor sounded like a plaque on a hallway wall, the kind people glanced at while waiting for an elevator. Grant watched her carefully. It is a strong offer, Claire. Strong, she repeated, tasting the word. He leaned forward, lowering his voice into that familiar register he once used when persuading landlords, bankers, and disappointed wives. This protects the company. It protects the employees. It protects you from years of litigation. You can walk away with security. Claire looked at him across the table and remembered a different table in the Maple Avenue office. Actually, 2 folding tables pushed together because they could not afford a conference table yet. She remembered Grant practicing his first investor pitch while she marked corrections with a red pen, softening his arrogance into confidence, turning his scattered promises into numbers people might trust. Back then, he had begged for her honesty. Now he was trying to purchase her silence. Evelyn placed the folder down. The court has already recognized Mrs. Whitman's standing. We are not interested in language that reduces that standing to a sentimental footnote. Grant's attorney adjusted his tie. The phrase is negotiable. The confidentiality provision is not. Claire looked at Vanessa then. Vanessa was staring at the offer sheet, her face controlled but tired around the eyes. For the first time, Claire wondered what Grant had promised her. A future, probably. A title. A clean story with no inconvenient woman standing at the foundation. Vanessa must have believed him, because people like Grant did not merely lie. They designed rooms where lies felt comfortable. Claire turned back to the attorney. What happens to the disputed release? The attorney paused. As part of settlement, all parties would agree not to pursue further claims related to prior record amendments. Linda made a tiny movement behind Claire, a tightening of breath. Evelyn did not move at all. Grant spoke before his attorney could stop him. Claire, be reasonable. No one benefits from digging through every old file. There are mistakes in every growing company. Mistakes, she said. Yes, administrative mistakes. The phrase floated above the table, sterile and weightless, until Claire placed her hand on her mother's handbag and gave it weight. An administrative mistake does not remove a founder from a company biography. It does not upload a release she never signed. It does not tell investors there are no ownership claims while archived documents say otherwise. Grant's face hardened. You want revenge. Claire felt the old reflex rise, the need to defend her goodness, to explain that she was not bitter, not greedy, not dramatic, not all the words men used when women became inconveniently precise. But the reflex passed. I want accuracy, she said. That is what frightens you. The room went still. Even the old wall clock seemed to tick more carefully. Evelyn slid the folder back across the table. Any settlement must include full correction of public and private records, disclosure to Northbridge, preservation of all documents, independent review of the disputed release, and language identifying Claire and Whitman as co-founder and original equity holder. Grant stared at the folder as if it had been returned on fire. His attorney whispered to him, urgent and low. Vanessa looked toward the door again. Claire stood, not dramatically, just enough to make clear that the meeting had found its shape. I spent years being reasonable while other people decided what my silence was worth. I am done pricing my name for someone else's convenience. She left the room with Evelyn beside her and Linda following close behind. In the hallway, the courthouse air felt cooler, cleaner. Behind the closed door, Grant could negotiate with damage, delay, and fear. Claire had already made her choice. The truth would not be corrected in private while the lie remained dressed for public view. By the end of that week, the private conference Grant had wanted became impossible to keep private, not because Claire spoke to reporters or because Evelyn leaked a single page, but because Northbridge Capital did what large firms do when risk appears on a balance sheet. They protected themselves loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. A formal notice went out to Whitman Development Group's board, its lenders, its outside counsel, and every executive involved in the acquisition. The closing was suspended indefinitely. All related records were to be preserved. All representations about ownership would be reviewed. By Monday morning, the same employees who had once lowered their voices when Claire's name came up were whispering it openly beside the elevators of the downtown office tower Grant had moved into after the company became successful enough to forget where it started. Claire did not go there. She did not need to. For years, Grant had mistaken visibility for power. Claire had learned that some of the strongest moves happened in quiet rooms with careful people and properly filed documents. Still, the past had a strange way of asking to be witnessed. On Tuesday, Evelyn received confirmation that the court had scheduled a status hearing to address the disputed release, the acquisition freeze, and the corrected business records. Linda's testimony would be entered. The archived documents would be certified. Northbridge's legal department would send a representative. Grant would have to stand in the same courtroom where he had once tried to reduce Claire to a clerical error and explain why so many records had changed after she was no longer there to object. The night before the hearing, Claire sat alone at her kitchen table with her mother's handbag open beside a stack of copies Evelyn had sent over. Outside, Hartwell Street glowed under the soft amber wash of streetlights. A delivery truck hummed at the curb. Somewhere downstairs, the pharmacy owner dragged trash bins across the sidewalk, the sound ordinary and grounding. Claire spread the documents in chronological order, not because Evelyn needed her to, but because she needed to see the shape of her own life without Grant's edits. May 17, 2012, formation filing. June 3, startup bank transfer. July 15th, lease guarantee. September 29th, first contractor payment. Month by month, line by line, she saw herself returning. Not as memory, as record. At the bottom of the pile was the forged release. Evelyn had not called it forged yet in court, not officially, because lawyers respected process even when process moved with the speed of a tired mule. But Claire knew her own signature. The shape was wrong. The pressure was wrong. The final letter in Whitman curved too sharply, as if someone had studied her name, but not her hand. She touched the page once, then pulled her fingers back. It no longer felt like a wound. It felt like evidence. Her phone buzzed near the sink. Grant. She watched his name fade from the screen without answering. A minute later, a message appeared. Claire, please. We should talk before tomorrow. She read it twice, then set the phone face down. Years ago, that word would have undone her. Please. He had used it when he needed her money, her patience, her smile, her silence. He had made need sound like love and urgency sound like devotion. Now it was just a word arriving too late at the wrong address. The next morning, Claire wore the same navy dress she had worn to the first hearing. Not because she had nothing else, but because she wanted Grant to see that she had not needed transformation to become powerful. She had only needed the truth to stop being buried. In the courthouse hallway, Linda waited beside Evelyn, clutching a folder against her chest. Northbridge's attorney, Patricia Lowell, stood near the courtroom doors in a gray suit, speaking quietly into her phone. Grant arrived with his attorney, but without Vanessa. The absence landed softly and said plenty. He looked at Claire, and for the first time there was no smirk, no pity, no polished disappointment. Only caution. Judge Hale took the bench at 9 o'clock. The clerk called the matter. Evelyn stood, calm as a locked door. Your Honor, she said, we are prepared to present certified records, witness testimony, and evidence that my client's removal from the company history was neither accidental nor harmless. Claire sat with her hands folded, feeling the weight of every year behind her and the strange lightness of not having to carry it alone anymore. When Linda was called, she walked forward slowly, raised her right hand, and promised to tell the truth. Grant stared at the table. Claire looked straight ahead. The truth, at last, had entered the room with a witness. Linda's testimony did not sound dramatic, and that was exactly why it carried. She did not embellish. She did not raise her voice. She explained the early accounting system, the original founder entries, the migration to the new platform, and the instruction she had received to remove inactive historical references before investor review. Grant's attorney tried to make the phrase sound harmless. Linda folded her hands and answered every question with the same steady patience she had once used to reconcile payroll on Friday afternoons. Historical references were not old wallpaper, she said. They were ownership records. A faint murmur moved through the courtroom before Judge Hale looked over her glasses and silence returned. Evelyn then submitted the certified archive files, the bank receipt, the lease guarantee, the migration logs, and the disputed release. Patricia Lowell from Northbridge stood only once, long enough to state that her client had not been informed of any competing ownership interest, original co-founder record, or disputed release before entering negotiations. Her statement was brief, professional, and colder than anger. It made clear that Grant's problem was no longer Claire alone. It had become institutional, financial, documented. Grant sat very still while the papers moved from hand to hand. Claire watched him without the old ache in her chest. She had expected, perhaps, to feel some grand satisfaction at seeing his confidence stripped down by procedure. Instead, she felt something quieter and cleaner. Distance. The kind of distance that comes when a storm finally moves far enough away that you can hear birds again. When Judge Hale returned from reviewing the submissions, the courtroom rose, then sat, and Claire felt every inch of the wooden bench beneath her palms. The judge's ruling was deliberate. The court ordered Claire and Whitman's name restored to all corrected business records connected to the formation and early ownership of Whitman Development Group. The disputed release would be referred for full forensic and legal review. The acquisition freeze would remain in place until ownership interests were properly disclosed and resolved. All amended records submitted during the Northbridge process would be preserved. Then Judge Hale looked directly at Grant. Administrative convenience does not authorize historical erasure, she said. A company may revise its records, but it may not rewrite reality to avoid accountability. Grant lowered his eyes. Vanessa was not there to witness it. His attorney wrote something on a legal pad with a hand that moved too quickly. Claire simply sat there, hearing her name again, not as an accusation, not as a plea, but as fact. Claire and Whitman, co-founder, original equity holder, restored party of record. Afterward, in the clerk's office, Evelyn placed the corrected order in front of her. The paper was heavy, cream-colored, stamped and signed, ordinary in appearance and enormous in meaning. Claire took the pen. For a second, her hand hovered above the signature line. She thought of her mother's $28,000, of gas station coffee, bad carpet, the paper sign in the Maple Avenue window, the years she had spent being called emotional by a man who had built an empire on her steadiness. Then she signed her name without shaking. Outside the courthouse, autumn had settled over the city in a wash of gold and gray. Linda hugged her carefully, then hurried off to call her daughter. Evelyn stood beside Claire on the steps, holding the folder against her coat. "You know this is not the end of the legal process," she said. Claire looked down at the courthouse plaza, where leaves skittered across the stone like small, bright things refusing to stay buried. "I know," she said, "but it is the end of something." She reached into her handbag and found the old photograph of the Maple Avenue office. For years, she had kept it as proof that Grant had once needed her. Now she understood it proved something better. She had once believed in a beginning, and she had helped build it with her own hands. Grant had tried to make her a blank space in the story because blank spaces do not ask questions, do not claim shares, do not stand in court while the truth is read aloud. But Claire was not a blank space. She was ink. She was signature. She was record. She walked down the courthouse steps with her name restored, not just on paper, but inside herself, where no clerk, husband, investor, or lie would ever remove it again. The weeks that followed did not unfold like the ending of a movie. There was no single morning when every wrong was repaired, no public apology printed in letters large enough to match the years of silence. Life, Claire had learned, rarely returned what was taken in the same shape. It gave back fragments, orders, signatures, amended filings, phone calls from people who suddenly remembered her number, and emails that began with phrases like "we were unaware" and "upon further review." Northbridge Capital withdrew from the acquisition before Thanksgiving, citing unresolved ownership and disclosure concerns. The notice was brief, careful, and devastating in the way corporate language can be when it decides to stop protecting someone. Whitman Development Group's board called an emergency meeting. Grant stepped down from active management pending internal review, a phrase that sounded gentle until Claire read between the lines. He had not been pushed off a cliff. He had simply run out of rooms where his version of the truth could stand without documents holding it up. Vanessa resigned from her advisory role 3 days later. She sent no message to Claire, and Claire expected none. Some people entered a story believing they were replacing someone, only to discover they had been handed a seat in a room built on a lie. Claire took no pleasure in that. Pity, maybe, but not pleasure. By early December, Evelyn called Claire into her office to review the corrected state filings. There it was on the official page, plain as a street sign, colder than poetry and more beautiful to Claire than any bouquet Grant had ever sent after an argument. Claire and Whitman, co-founder, original equity holder. Her ownership percentage would still be negotiated. The disputed release would still move through legal review. There would be accountants, forensic examiners, court dates, and probably more expensive men explaining why simple things were complicated when money was attached. But the central lie had collapsed. Her name was no longer something Grant could treat like a private inconvenience. After the meeting, Claire drove alone to Maple Avenue. The old storefront had become a real estate office with new paint, better lighting, and a tasteful sign in brushed steel. The bad carpet was gone. The paper sign was gone. The cracked sidewalk where she and Grant had once stood eating sandwiches from wax paper was still there, though patched in places and stained by years of weather. Claire parked across the street and sat for a while with the engine off, watching people move through the glass door without knowing they were walking through the first room of someone else's survival. She did not need them to know. That surprised her most. For so long, she had wanted recognition because she thought recognition would undo the humiliation. But standing there, she understood that the deepest repair had not come from Grant, Northbridge, the board, or even the court. It had come from the moment she stopped asking a dishonest man to be the keeper of her truth. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel appeared. Mom would be proud. Claire smiled, and this time the ache that came with her mother's memory did not hollow her out. It warmed her. She opened the glove compartment and took out the old photograph of the storefront, the one she had carried through hearings like a small square of proof. For a moment, she considered putting it away forever, but that felt too much like another kind of erasure. Instead, she slid it into the front pocket of her handbag, where it could bend, age, and travel with her into whatever came next. Then she stepped out of the car and crossed the street. The December air was sharp enough to sting her cheeks. A young receptionist inside the real estate office glanced up as Claire entered and asked if she had an appointment. Claire looked around at the room that had once held unpaid bills, folding tables, bad coffee, and the beginning of everything. "No," she said softly. "I just used to work here." The receptionist smiled politely, not understanding, and that was all right. Claire did not need the room to remember her. She remembered herself.